All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's so good to be back together again, talking about seizure action plans. We're really excited for today's webinar to celebrate, that's not the right word, to mark, in honor of Seizure Action Plan Awareness Week, which, as many of you have probably seen, is an effort that was started by the LGS Foundation, Dravet Syndrome Foundation, and Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance. And so we're really grateful to be here because of them, and to kind of discuss what does it mean to, mark this, and why are we doing it. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have folks introduce themselves. I'm going to stop sharing this so we just see our beautiful faces. And I'll do a quick round. So for those of you who joined us last year for our webinar series on rescue meds and seizure action plans that we did with the LGS Foundation, you'll recognize these faces. So we have Jennifer Griffin, who's works with the LGS Foundation and has a son with LGS, Lennox Gasto. We also have Elizabeth Terry, who has, whose daughter Spencer also has LGS. And we have Shanna, whose daughter has CACNA1A. So we're all coming to this as caregivers and advocates and people who are wanting to help spread the word about seizure action plans and the role that they play. And I think if you haven't yet had the chance, it's powerful to go to the Seizure Action Plan page. It's Seizure Action, let me just double check, I'm telling people right. Yes, seizureactionplans.org. And there's some stories there about families and the role that seizure action plans have played for them, the comfort that they've given them, and the value that those have held. And they're very powerful. And, we'll be talking about that today, but just another place to go and see why these are really important. So maybe we can start by just kind of going around and talking about our evolution with seizure action plans, what they've looked like, and just your experience with them. And then I think we'll show a clip from Dr. Ches, who did the second webinar for us in the series to show a little bit of his guidance, and then we'll come back and discuss. So Shanna, you want to start us off?
Yes, I do. So my daughter Ireland is 5, and as Gabi says, she has a CACNA1A mutation that is the cause of her intractable epilepsy. And I am really passionate about Ireland's seizure action plan because I think that it has saved her life and protected her brain more times than I can count. Unfortunately, we've had to use it a lot. And so I don't know how detailed you want me to get at this point, just an introduction or?
You can go ahead and share some of your thoughts. I mean, we can, touch on different things, but yeah, feel free to share what you want now.
Okay, so Ireland's seizure action plan was born at the end of a ICU stay. We were in for status and getting ready to go home after 2.5 weeks. She was eating by mouth again, ready to go home. And so they were going to discharge us. And I said, wait a minute, we're not ready. Like, you can't send me home. I don't have, we're in here because the diastat didn't work. We need a new plan. We need a plan. And so, of course, the discharging doctor is not her treating neurologist. So they got on the phone with her treating neurologist and came up with a plan. And it ended up being a 2-part plan, one for home, and then also a plan for once we're in the ER, because another, as those of you with status know that certain drugs, once you've exhausted your options at home, once you get to the ER, certain things work better than others. And so to have that written and just be able to hand to the ER doctor is really helpful, because we've forgotten this written plan before. And, you know, they're over there, the nurse is over there at the computer looking up what worked last time when your child's laying there on the table. And so it's really been, you know, a big part of our lives, this plan, and it's really saved her life several times. So we love our plan, and it's not perfect. It actually needs to be updated right now. So I'm thankful for Awareness Week, because it's like on my radar that
Right.
I've got to do some updates. So it's
Terrific.
evolving.
Yeah. And I'm super excited to chat more with you, Shanna, because you are such like a great story of just like taking charge and saying, no, like I need something, you need to help me to not be back here.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, all of the women on this call kind of have that strength to do that. And I want to help, I want us all to inspire other families and who, you know, I think the group of us here are louder, outspoken women who are strong, you know, and I always hear stories about, you know, from families who just have a harder time speaking up and out, and they always end up doing it, but it might take some time. So really kind of encouraging families to continue to say, you know best, you know what you need, and to speak up and get what you need, because that's the only way it's going to happen. So Elizabeth, you want to tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, well, I can piggyback on what Shanna was saying, and I want to note, you know, you said it needs to be updated. And I think that the great thing that I have going right now is my daughter's epileptologist always prints a new one off every appointment. So it's not something that's hanging over my head that I have to go do. Every appointment, every couple of months, at the end of our appointment, we sit and have a discussion. Okay, where are we on the seizure action plan? Does it still fit? Do we need to tweak it? And then we'll make our decision. He'll print it off, 2 copies. So I have one in our travel bag and then one that's in her little medicine box at home. So that is really just easy, because you have a sounding board with someone that knows what he's doing. And so that's just something to think about, talking to your doctor about. But I didn't have a seizure action plan. Same thing with you, Shanna. When in March, when we went to the hospital for status, those seizures were not stopping. And the attending neurologist there, of course, is not her epileptologist. And he said, our rule is we will administer rescue meds if she has 3 seizures within 15 minutes. And that's very nice. I understand why they have to have a standard, you know, protocol. I can understand that. But I was just saying, well, that's great, but that might not work for my kid. You know, for some kids out there, you know, where they have maybe 3 seizures a year, if they have 3 seizures in 48 hours, that's a crisis. You know, so it just varies on what a crisis is per child. So, you know, my kid had several in 15 minutes, but she'd also had several in 12 hours, which I know she needed rescue meds. And so me just standing there saying, yeah, but, and he just said, sorry, that's the rule. If I had had my seizure action plan that I could hold up, signed by her doctor and listed out, that would have carried so much more weight in me advocating for my child. So that's another good reason to have one.
Yeah, and I love that story, not because it was, I mean, it's terrible that happened, but because people don't think that you need a seizure emergency plan or action plan for the hospital. Oh, they know what they're doing. This is where you go when you're in trouble, and they know how to help. Well, they don't know your kid. And they are, especially emergency departments, I feel like they are a lot less likely to listen to the wisdom of parents, because in their eyes, it's like, okay, emergency, we follow our protocols. This is what we do. But if you walk in with your paper, you know, and hopefully it's a doctor that they know and respect, or, you know, will, you know, believe that this is a valid thing. Yeah, right before we started this webinar, the 4 of us were talking about like how frustrating it is to have to fight so many different things, and that it just shouldn't be the case that, you know, we go in and say, this is not what works for her. This is what we need to do. So unfortunately, we have to have it validated by a doctor who listens to what we say works, and then they'll do it. So anyway, All right, I'll get off my soapbox now. So Jen, tell us about your journey with Theo.
Gosh, yeah, listening to all this is already making me think of new things to say. But it's almost like, you know, when you have an IEP team, right? When you're creating an IEP for your child, it's not one size fits all, it's individualized. And you have to have a team and they all have to come together and they all have to have some input. And I guess it's sort of like that with, you know, your seizure team. And that could be anybody that's experienced a seizure with your child and what they would like to know. And, you know, so you want to know from them, like if it's a caregiver, what would have helped you in this, you know, cope with something? If like, you know, if back in the day, if you actually got a little respite and got to go out of the house, if you know, left your child with a caregiver or a babysitter or a friend or a family member or anything like that, what information did they have that would make them feel confident in responding the way you would like them to respond in the event of a seizure? And I know we've had similar, or actually the opposite situation to Elizabeth, but in going to the ER, I've had ER docs tell me, you're the mom, you know best. I've never heard of this LGS thing. And recently my son had, you know, he had about, I think he had 20 seizures in a 40-minute period. And so, you know, he was with his dad and his dad called me after midnight and said, okay, he is seizing. I've given him Klonopin. And I said, well, we're looking up Klonopin. We're Googling it as we go. How long should you wait? All of that kind of stuff. And I said, well, my only hesitation is in taking him to the ER, which is something I normally would have done without thought, is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's all this COVID around. And do I want to take him to the ER only to know that somebody's going to turn to me and say, what do you think we should do? And I could do that at home. And I know his neurologist was probably going to say, give him Klonopin, because that's what we always do. So it's not really helpful, though, to any of us. And actually, we spoke to his neurologist a week later, and she said, that was the worst decision. You should always go to the ER. They can get you into a room right away. And I thought, you know, there is no precedent for these kinds of situations now, and for these additional concerns that we all have right now, which is COVID. So, you know, everything was fine. Within about a half an hour, his seizures stopped. But I guess had they continued, yes, we would have gone to the ER. We would have taken that risk. But I also think of situations like one time when my son and he kind of fell into me and we fell back and things got broken. And I used to say afterwards, you know, oh, thank goodness it wasn't my head that I hit. It was just a little bruise on my back. And so I was thinking about that today in preparation for this call, because I thought, what if something happens to me and I'm the one that is calling the ER or calling the EMTs to come and get me because I'm in crisis. If I'm, you know, fortunate enough to be somewhat conscious, if an ambulance comes to my house for me and it's just me and my son in the house, how can I direct them to make sure that he's taken care of if I'm going to the ER? So I've thought, okay, all of my friends have said to me, you know, text us as soon as you put him in the bath and as soon as you take him out of the bath, because they want to make sure that nothing happens. That's when the dangerous thing happened. It was me getting him out of the bath. And I thought, well, I guess I should have this information readily available to as many people as possible. My best friends, my ex-husband who lives only 10 minutes away, but what if he's out of town? My daughters who both live in other cities, you know, so everybody should know. I should have like some sort of a group text that says, you know, we're in crisis right now. Make sure you can guide people to where the seizure action plan is so that Theo is taken care of. So there's all these new questions that keep coming up because of discussions like this, where we thought all we needed was just a simple seizure action plan. He has a seizure and this is what you do. But it's so much more. It's what if something happens to me? And what if, you know, all of those other considerations that are now kind of swimming about in my brain are making it that much more complex and necessary.
Yeah, and it's, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there too, that it's, there's so many things we have to think about and be prepared for, right? And like, you know, I mean, frankly, my husband and I never drive anywhere together because, you know, or go anywhere together ever, because like, what if something happens? Like, that would be a total disaster, you know? And basically, you know, we're unfortunately at a point in our lives where we almost never leave the house with one of us not being here with Elliot, even if there's a nurse, even if my mother is here or something, because, you know, we know what to do best, but that's not really a sustainable, you know, model. And for some of us, like, we don't really have a choice but to always be there. But, you know, like if we send our kids to school, right, we, you know, have to make sure that those people have a sense of what to do and how. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But I just also would say, from my perspective, I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I think that these plans make so much sense. And what they do for us as parents is help relieve that kind of, that underlying fear that's always kind of like hanging over us, right? Like, well, what if, and what if, and what if? And it just kind of allows us to say, okay, well, there's something in place, you know, it's not going to be total and utter chaos, maybe some chaos, but not, you know, total chaos if something did happen. So anyway, I was thinking that we would listen to a little bit of the talk from Dr. Ches. Basically, he goes through and talks about 10 considerations when you're putting together your seizure action plan. He calls it a rescue plan in here, but don't mind that. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. We're not.
Think of when we do a rescue plan. And you can modify these to your needs, but I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what I think about parents and caregivers should think about when they talk to their doctors and when they want to plan something. So as a physician, I'd like to know that you know what your diagnosis is. If you have a genetic diagnosis, or if you have just a, we don't know what caused the Lennox-Gastaut or the epilepsy. And we want to know when their last EEG was. If it's been many years, that might make a difference of what I know about what to do with medicines versus if it was done just 3 months ago or a year ago. When was the last MRI done? Was it done when the child was a year old and now they're 12, or was it done at age 8? And if they have a genetic condition, I'd like to know what that is, if possible. And if they have any allergic reactions to medications now, or any funny reactions behaviorally to medications. And are there any side effects that, you know, we need to worry about, that the medications they take now may interfere with the rescue plan medicine? So knowing what seizure medicines your patient, your family member is on, knowing if they have a genetic condition, knowing when their last EEG or MRI or other blood tests were done, when was their last drug level if they need drug levels. Those are things I'd like to know about. You know, if they're sick and things like that, if they're prone to kidney stones, if they're prone to urinary tract infections, these are all important things for us to know. And also know the frequency and types of seizures that occur is number 2. If your child has seizures once a week, what type are they? If they have seizures every day, what type are they? And if they're daily, weekly, monthly, we need to know so that if we can define what an emergency is. If you have a grand mal seizure once a year, then you know if you have a grand mal seizure twice in a month, that something may be off with their medication. If you have seizures every day that are 20 a day and they suddenly go up to 100 a day, that might constitute an emergency rescue medicine need for your child that day. Whereas it may not for someone who has 100 seizures a day, which hopefully isn't happening very often out there nowadays. If you have someone who had 20 seizures a week and now they're having 100 a week, that might constitute a rescue medication, even though it's not a true status epilepticus or cluster seizure. Step number 3, know what your child's seizures look like and when they stop. Can you tell the difference between when they're having a seizure and when they're not? You need to know that so that you know when something changes, and that's your signal when you may want to give a rescue med. How do you define the emergency depends on what you define as your child having more seizures than usual. So that's very important. Step 4, we want you to know your baseline medications and then the doses and time of day. And if you have drug levels, know when they work. Sometimes a child is tired because their medicine levels are too high. Sometimes a child's tired because they're coming down with a virus or they have something like mono or something like that. So these are all important things to know because your rescue medicines may make them more tired. You want to know the difference of what their baseline is typically and when their drug levels typically are. Number 5, know if there's any medication that they're on that could affect the rescue medication. So for instance, if you're going to give a medicine like
just a note to say, I'm sorry, there's a blip in here where the slides aren't advancing. So you'll see the rest of the numbers coming up in a second on the slides.
Diastat or Valtoco or midazolam in the nasal spray. You want to know if they're on a benzodiazepine like Valium or midazolam. You want to know if they're on clobazam or Klonopin or Onfi, or it's another name for some of those. You also want to know if they're on CBD. If they're on CBD, that's going to raise the levels of benzodiazepine. So your rescue medicine may be even higher than it would be without it after you give it. And it may slowly come out of their body if they're on medicines that interfere with those things. So those are all very important things. You also want to know what their diagnosis is. And we'll talk about that a little more too, because if they have Dravet syndrome, they may not want to get Dilantin, which is a sodium drug, a channel drug, which could make them worse. Number 6, you should know if your child's having any bad reactions to treatments, anesthesias, medicines, or any other allergies that they have that might make a rescue medicine more a risk. So in other words, if they had a bad reaction to something and they had an allergic rash or airway closure, that's different than if someone just was acting like a drunken sailor and behaving badly. We know that some medicines disinhibit you, and the children can be temperamental or angry or hyper. That's different than having something that gives you an allergic rash or makes you not breathe. That medicine may help stop the seizures even if they behave badly, but if it really causes a real true allergic reaction, we wouldn't want to give it. Number 7, no contraindications. Like I said, if you have Dravet syndrome, lacosamide, Vimpat IV, or phenytoin dilantin IV may be contraindicated. Or if they're on a chronic benzodiazepine, they may need higher doses of rescue medicine. If they're on a ketogenic diet, you want to avoid IV glucose solutions if possible. Step number 8, if you're on a hard to get medication or experimental medications, then have a travel bag to take in the ambulance or emergency room in case you have a prolonged stay or admission. And you should always have a written medication sheet of everything your child is on, and either have that online where you can download it to your phone or get a printed version, or have a hard copy, sometimes even laminated, that you can take with you and make a copy at the hospital so that everybody knows the same information. With electronic records, that helps. However, those get out of date very quickly. If you give a phone call to the on-call person at night, they make a med change and no one updates it the next day, you may come in a month later and the old medicine dose is there and not the new one. So you need to know what dosages you're on. Number 9, stay calm and always be courteous and make yourself part of the rescue team by providing good information. Know what your child is on. Clear communication to help others, like the emergency technicians, the EMTs, or the triage nurses, school nurses or physicians, whoever they may be. Let them know what the traditional way you help your child in emergency is, so they can do the same thing. Or if something didn't work, you can tell them that didn't work. Can we try something else? And try to be proactive in rescue medication use or rescue plans, because it's always easier to treat earlier than treat later. So for instance, if my child's seizing and I was told to give the medicine at 5 minutes, but I'm nervous and I see I gave it at 3 minutes, is that bad? No, probably treating earlier is better. We just don't want people to always overdo it, because some seizures usually stop within 2 minutes. And if they go longer, it's fine to give it at 3 minutes if you have to. But it's always better to be proactive. Or if someone starts to have more seizures than usual, and it's maybe 10 normally, and now you see there's 20 today, and then it's 30 the next day, treating when it's 20 or 30 is better than when it gets up to 100 a day. It might be much more difficult 5 days later to treat that than on the first day when you treat it. So again, if you know your child's seizures, you can tell when there's something different than their baseline. And that's the key to rescue early. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about how do you communicate with your neurologist.
All right. So I have no idea why the slides didn't forward on there, but as it goes with technology. But what I will do is I'll put the link to all of these webinars in the chat. And for anybody who wants that resource, you can find it there. And he also has Dr. Chiz also included a really helpful list of 4 things to ask your doctor. And basically it's like, those are things that, you're interviewing your doctor, and if they don't feel like they have the comfort level to treat your child, you should go elsewhere. So I wanted to play that just to help give some of the context for these. But maybe what we can do now is go around and talk a little bit about kind of in practice. And Shanna, beforehand, you and I were talking about how you've managed this in the past in terms of, laying things out as simple as possible for people. We're also going to start talking a little bit about the difference between a seizure action plan and a seizure emergency plan, and how those are both, they're different, but both necessary. So feel free to touch on that if you want.
Okay. When you mention a seizure action plan, and I was going through the Awareness Week website, I think that one of the easiest ways to tell a therapist or a teacher at school or a caregiver that you're leaving your child with, instead of just a written description of their seizures, is showing them a video. I think that's really helpful. And if they do, encounter a seizure, maybe they're prepared. They've seen it on camera before, and maybe it's not so shocking, if they see it for the first time. But we really have, our plan is more of an emergency plan. And so we have a written letter from the doctor signed, and then it also has it has what to do at home. And then it also has what to do, the instructions for the ER staff, what works particularly for Ireland. So we have that, but I thought that was a little overwhelming for Ireland's therapist. She's not in school, she sees therapists. So I created this, and it's just a little more, it's a simplified version, and it's laminated, and it goes in her backpack that goes with her everywhere. She's just down the hall, nobody worry. got her backpack, but she's just down the hall. And it needs to be updated. There's even an address on here. This is just a personal thing that I added. 911 always asks, what's your address? And if somebody else is on the phone with 911, you don't want them to be saying, oh, what's our address at the therapy center? So that was just a little something I added on there. And then, as a mom and as a special needs mom, you always think like worst case scenario, or I do anyway. And I wouldn't want anybody to panic. And I tried to make it as easy as possible. So here's her emergency pack, goes in her nose, her butt, and her cheek. 1, 2, 3. So we've got the hospital version, and where people can read all the dirty details, and then a little bit more simple, and then don't freak out. It's easy. It's just 1, 2, 3 right here. And then another big part of Ireland's emergency plan and seizure action plan that we added later. So she stops breathing. She turns blue. We're one of those. And so we added an ambu bag and oxygen and a pulse ox, which if you're not connected, if you don't have an LGS or a Dravet diagnosis, and you're not plugged in with a group of parents that tell you that those are things that you can ask for and talk to your doctor about, you may not know. With a CACNA1A diagnosis, when Ireland was first diagnosed, there was no family foundation. There was just a Facebook group. And I think there's a lot of genetic epilepsies out there with severe seizures, and they don't really have a home, or not a strong home yet. You know, it's coming one day, hopefully, for them. But if you don't have that, you know, there's no other parents, and the doctor is not familiar with the diagnosis, you know. So just to empower those parents out there who may not know that they can ask, if your child does experience respiratory depression, definitely talk to your doctor about having those things at home. Ireland's rescue seizure action plan and rescue protocol has, knock on wood, kept us out of the hospital for the past 1.5 years. So I think we all know that the hospital is the worst place to recover from a seizure, and we all want to do our best to stay home. So all of these pieces together, including the equipment, gives me confidence in staying home, because I do have a way to support her respiratory wise. So knock on wood, this has kept us out of the hospital successfully.
Yeah, there's so many things I love about what you've done, just like having different levels of communication available for people so that they can see that it's just 1, 2, 3, or if they, you know, are able to kind of stop and look and read. And what I really think is important is that you're trying to see things from the perspective of somebody else who is kind of there with Ireland and in crisis. I think that's sometimes hard to imagine. I know a lot of us try to not leave our kids, you know, ever. And so, you know, it's harder to kind of put ourselves in the shoes and imagine doing it, to let somebody else kind of take the reins. So that's awesome. Thank you. Elizabeth, we know you have a lot more experiences to share on this, sadly, but.
Oh, we all do. We could all go on for hours, I'm sure. But I like how you, Gabi, how you said that Shanna has levels. And I would agree that that's a really good way to go about it. You know, I kind of think for me, it's different for everyone, but the levels would be seizure first aid, seizure action, and then seizure emergency. And so with seizure first aid, I like how you really simplified it for your caregivers. I put together a PowerPoint for her teachers at school. And before she starts any school year, everyone has to watch the PowerPoint. And I just make it very basic, you know, turn her on her side, protect her head, you know, just seizure first aid. And anybody, it's in her healthcare plan at school, has to be trained by the nurses first. So the nurses are the point people. Everyone goes through the nurses first, or myself first. And then the nurses are the ones that would administer the seizure action, you know, after the staff has gotten the first aid taken care of. So I kind of agree with those levels that way. And plans in levels. So for example, my daughter goes to her dad's 2 nights a month, and I'm on call during those nights, though I'd love to use them for sleep. I'm still on call. So she has a seizure, you know, then he does seizure first aid and can handle that. But then if they go on and there's another seizure, then I get involved, you know, he calls me and I kind of direct seizure action. And if And recently we needed to do a rescue med. And so I walked him through that. And generally that's it. Her seizure action plan shows go this far, and generally going this far takes care of it. However, Jen, you had mentioned the pandemic. And so her doctor and I did add another level to that. How far can I go at home? How far can I possibly go before having to take her to the hospital? And just a couple months ago, I did have to go to that next level. And it was, in the middle of the night. And we all know things by heart. We're mothers, and we handle these things all the time. But I actually needed to go and get her seizure emergency plan out of her medicine box and consult it, because now we were at the next level. And I needed to know, without Googling, I needed to know how far I could go, how many doses I could give, and under what circumstances before calling 911. So it was really worth it to have to get in my car at 3 a.m. and run more rescue meds to his apartment for him, to keep us from having to go to the hospital. And we were able to go through the levels on our plan and handle it at home. So that's another way you can tailor it to your own child.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. And you're so right. It's different for everybody, right? So every kid is going to be different, and how we handle things. And what you said reminded me of what Tracy said during this series, was that, when Savannah was in school, she would say, don't call 911, call me. And it's just, everybody has a different level of comfort. It's like, no, we don't want her in the hospital again. She doesn't need to go to the hospital for this. I know what to do. Call me. I do this, my steps. And then I know if it's time to go further. And I love that you were proactive and got kind of that extra level. And I'm sure that in the moment you were so grateful that you did that, so that, yeah, none of us want to be anywhere near a hospital right now. And Shanna, something else I remembered was that when you're talking about respiratory depression and when that happens for our kids, I think we also need some system that is better to help people get that approved, right? Doctors are happy to write it a lot of the time, even after some, arguments on this, but then the health insurance companies won't cover it. So there's a fight there. And before we started, we were also talking about how exhausting it is to have to justify, meds to insurance companies and equipment. And so I don't know, I wish we had maybe we can do this is like find successful letters that have been submitted to insurance companies to say, this is how you word it. This is the kind of diagnosis you have to put on there. And that's how we get this stuff. Anyway, just a thought. But Jen, what are you thinking?
Oh, there, unmuted myself. Actually, I have my situation isn't as detailed, and I'm so impressed with Elizabeth and Shanna for the details that they have. I think that, and I was sitting here going, okay, why is that? And I realized that, I live in kind of a smallish town. Santa Barbara is kind of smallish. I've been in sort of the family support services field ever since pretty much shortly after we moved here. And so, I worked 5 minutes from the school, and his dad is 10 minutes away. And so we've always had, the only people that are ever with Theo are the teachers and the staff at school, or his dad and I. And any respite workers we've ever used, it's either been my daughters, his older sisters. Theo's 18, by the way. And aides from the school. So when they start at the school, they have to go through a whole training. And the staff, we've been really, really lucky that the staff at the schools has not changed. We've had the same aides. This is the first year that we have a new aide. No, pardon me, last year was, but the aide that they had last year that they hired was an EMT. That's what he had decided he wanted to get into education. And then the one that we have now this year is just really good. And he was really easy to train. But they have to go through this whole training. They have to go through this really hilarious VNS training, which I find kind of funny because, you know, swipe, you know, but they have to have a training. So we're very lucky in that we're usually pretty confident that the people working with him understand how to work with him before we leave them alone with him. But I'm like Tracy. The rule is at the school that they call me 1 minute into a seizure. And then I just get in the car. And if I hear, and then they call me again at 3 minutes. And then we're very fortunate in that Theo does not have like 5-minute seizures. But, you know, he used to when he was younger, but now he's 18 and we're, you know, we're in a pretty good place with the seizures. We just have, most of the time his seizures have been during sleep and, you know, or first thing in the morning. So they're usually when he's at home and very rarely at school. But what I'm finding is that's making me a little bit complacent. Like I'm not, you know, you all know what it's like you get into that, you start to assume that this is what our seizure experience is right now. He usually has them at this time. They usually last this long. We do whatever it is we do, and then it's over. And just that experience that we had last month when he had the 20 seizures, you know, I thought, oh, that's been a while since we've done one of those. And it woke me up, you know, to realize that you just have to have the plan and just hope that it never has to happen. But in all of our lives, the never always does happen, right? Eventually. And so we need to have that all written down. So we did end up ordering one of the new rescue meds after this happened, because we realized that while our go-to has always just been clonazepam, that's it. That's all it's ever been. I thought, nope, I think it's time to get something on hand just in case, because I don't want this to happen again. And I don't want to end up in the ER. I mean, there's, you know, it's just like everybody else. So yeah, we're not as detailed and organized, but we do have a plan. We do have, like, especially the plan at school is much more detailed than the one we have at home, although the one we have at home is changing to be something a little bit more detailed and comprehensive. And I think the idea of laminating is just, I think every parent with a kid with special needs should have a laminator, because I don't know why, but it just makes things easier to find, easier to store, put it on your fridge and like use the VNS magnet to keep it on the fridge so that you know where that is. And, but we have things like, you know, seizure types and seizure triggers and, you know, things to look for post-ictal, and when to call, and, you know, it can get quite hot here. So things to do to make sure, like, keep him hydrated. And we don't put him on the bus. That was a decision we made way back in the day, that he was not ever going to ride the bus. And that was just because we could figure it out. So that's not a judgment against people that do put their kids on a bus, because sometimes you have to, right? We didn't have to. So I decided that, you know, I didn't want him on a bus having a seizure with nobody to be there with him. I mean, now we could get somebody to ride the bus with him now, but back in the day when this was starting out, we didn't have that option. And we didn't know that we could have that option where you could get an aide to ride the bus with them. And you know, but then what if you have to, I mean, back then, what if you had to tell the bus driver to pull over to the side of the road so that you could administer Diastat? I mean, that to me just sounded like was too overwhelming for me. So, yeah, I can't think of anything else that we have on the plan at school. I'm sure there's something. There's stuff about the magnet and
Right.
and you know the nursing staff and what they've been trained to do and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I think, and I want to make sure that people feel free to put any questions or comments or thoughts or tricks that you've come up with in the chat, because we'd love to hear from you too. But I thought maybe we could quickly go back to the difference between a seizure action plan and a seizure emergency plan, because this is something that they make the distinction. English is hard. They make the distinction about on the Seizure Action Plan website that, you know, for all of our kids, you know, the more complex, it probably makes sense to have this seizure emergency plan, the SEP, which kind of has all of the information about if there are prolonged or clusters of seizures going on that can be easily shared with other caregivers or emergency crews that come in, just to have kind of like the dirty, down and dirty, like what Shanna has, that you don't have to read a lot, but, you know, allergic to this, if seizures do this, you know, who to contact, that kind of thing. And then the Seizure Action Plan has kind of the deeper level of details about, you know, my child does best if you do this, and this is something that's a trigger, and kind of all of that more detailed stuff. So I wanted to talk about a little bit more about who we share them with. And I loved, Elizabeth, you talking about that you have a PowerPoint, you walk everybody through it, that Shanna, you show the videos. And I feel like that is so critical in so many ways. I think one way you said it, Shanna, was like, so that people aren't freaked out and scared, and then so that they know what to expect and can see it in action, kind of. So I think that's fantastic. And I wonder if you guys would talk about whether there are other people that you've thought to share these plans with. I know in our webinar series, we talked about whether maybe we just like have one on the wall right inside the front door of the house, right? In case there was something that happened to, you know, we are all catastrophize and think about the worst scenarios. So we're like, okay, put one here, put one in the bathroom, put one in the kitchen, on the fridge with the VNS magnet. Are there other places you thought it was useful to kind of pass that on to, or give that to, so people would kind of be familiar with the idea of what to do?
I think in your car as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. And I keep an updated copy in her bag, you know, Shanna, your backpack there. I mean, every kid has the bag with all the stuff in it. And so there's always a fresh copy in there. So wherever she goes, the bag goes. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my way of keeping it on her person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, you know, yeah. And, you know, we also talked about kind of, you know, what happens if something happens to us, right? Somebody else needs to know how to manage some of that. And, you know, the scenario that I think all of us thought about with COVID, it's like, well, what happens if I get sick and I am not available? You know, we are the ones that do the day in, day out care. And, you know, there's an LGS mom who went through that. She was a single mom who did it. And she was so organized. She was so prepared. She had a binder with everything in it. I know she's brilliant. She's like my hero. And her mother was able to take over care, even though she wasn't a consistent caregiver, and keep her daughter well while she was intubated in the hospital, you know, and not able to do anything. And so I feel like that story kind of epitomizes the importance of being prepared with, you know, not just, you know, a seizure action plan, which is a very good start, but there's so much more to do, which is so overwhelming. But, you know, I feel like this is a really important place to start. And for people whose kids go to school, I feel like, do you have a different plan that is like on a school template, or can you just make one that's all purpose and hand it off to them too? Because my son doesn't go to school. We're too scared to send him to school. You know, because he also gets like, you know, if he gets a cold, he's in the ICU for 2 weeks. So, but any thoughts on school plans?
Well, I feel like my daughter's plan is ever changing. You know, for example, I was needing to ration her rescue med because 2020 was just rough in every way. And she just was needing a rescue med so often that insurance wasn't filling it as much as I needed them to. And because they were saying it's not a routine med. And I was like, it kind of is becoming routine. I don't want it to be. So we needed to ration that and alter her seizure emergency plan accordingly. And so I just print off new copies. The doctor does. I say, I need this many copies. I'm thinking of where they need to go. And then, so that's the beauty of working with your doctor, is you have a fresh one all the time with his signature and fresh copy. So that's kind of my way to do it. Is I don't laminate because I'd have to re-laminate every time.
I love laminating.
Yeah, there's something very satisfying about laminating.
Something looks so pretty.
I know. Yeah, the ex-teacher in me is like, oh, I love it, you know, laminating. But yeah, and I think that, and that's something that Dr. Shez talks more about in that webinar, is like how to talk to your doctor about this, what you should expect of your doctor, and if they don't live up to it, find a doctor. And I mean, Elizabeth, that makes me remember that you also travel 6 hours. What is it to get to a doctor you really trust?
I know. Well, it's, with all the potty stops, it's about 8 hours away, which is why it's really important to have everything in writing and everything electronic. So with our local hospital, it's all right there.
Does he send it to them so they have it on file?
Well, now with all the, it's so much better. There's a Epic, I don't know if I can say that, but that's the computer program that hospitals around the country share, so they can look and see everything that's going on and all of her records. But it's just important to have that updated piece of paper in the travel bag to hand to the doctor as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. So I don't see anybody chiming in, but you're welcome to. We got a couple extra minutes left. Are there any closing thoughts that you all have as this fantastic conversation kind of winds up? I also wanted to just quickly, if I can figure out how to do computer stuff, share this while, you know, so that people kind of get a peek at what is here and, you know, how incredible these tools are. That seizureactionplans.org. It's an incredible collection of all the things you need to know. You can send your doctor here, you see, for healthcare providers. If you don't feel like your doctor knows what should be in a seizure action plan, there's templates. There's all of that. So I definitely encourage people to explore this website to learn more. So I just wanted to pull that up. And then any final thoughts from all of you? I mean, I think I always love talking with you all. I feel like I get so many more ideas, and just love the creativity that we all have to come up with as special needs families to think about how we do this. Jen, that the image of the seizure action plan on the fridge with a VNS magnet is not gonna leave my mind anytime soon. I mean, hey, that makes total sense. Yeah.
Doesn't it? Yeah, I know. It's mind you, we have to grab the magnet a lot, so it has to have another magnet on there as well, so that it
so it doesn't fall. It's kind of ingenuity that we have here.
My final thought would be, you know, Shanna, you had said that having all that stuff organized makes you a lot more confident of what you can do at home. And just before I started, you know, working with her doctor on the seizure action plan and seizure emergency plan, I didn't feel like I feel now. I didn't have this level of security. It just was this sort of underlying fear. So having something on paper just really is peace of mind. And that's something that all of us as caregivers of these kids, we treasure. It's just a little sense of security. So it's just another good reason to just get yourself a little boost of confidence and just have that done.
Definitely. Shanna or Jen, any final thoughts about?
No, I have a lot of final thoughts. I mean, a lot of thoughts. My head's going beyond this topic.
Final.
Yeah. I'm really thinking about things like, when you were talking about the LGS mom who had the binder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just thinking, future topics. One could be just what's in your binder, because, just this topic alone is so critical. And yet all of the other things that surround it, like the, I have like a one-page profile of my son. So something that talks about, what's important to him, what's important for him, what does he like, what doesn't he like, his favorite foods, his favorite, I think that in the event that something happens, natural disasters or pandemics or things where we are taken away from our kids for an extended period of time, do any of us have that level of detail so that we can, continue to the continuity of care can continue sort of seamlessly beyond, when they're with us. And I know somebody just had a question about.
Yeah, Kayla was just bringing
mom, and it's like, I'm a single mom. Elizabeth is a single mom. And while I have a good, ex-husband who co-parents really well with me, when Theo is with me, he's just with me. There's nobody else in the house. There's nobody else to sort of hand him off to, or, if I have to go to the hospital or something. So there really needs to be, we have to do everything we can to protect them to the best of our abilities. And I know I always come away from these conversations thinking I could be doing more. And it's not me being all hard on myself. It's just learning new things that I can add to my own personal toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just putting our email in the chat if anybody wants to share thoughts about other kind of webinars that they like, because we're always wanting to kind of follow your lead. And I think the binder, we're working on a series called Be Prepared that talks about some of those different things, one of them being the binder, and other things like, bigger planning, like how do you think about custody of your child if you're to pass, and how do you, plan for, I'm trying to think of the names of all these documents we're supposed to have. I can't even think of them, but all the things we're supposed to do that are hard to do and are on our to-do list, and we don't quite get to them. So I'd love to also think about making them into workshops, frankly, so that we can work on it then. So it's not just a like, oh yeah, I should do that kind of thing, but we'll work on that. So feel free to reach out if you have ideas, thoughts, feedback, anything. And I just want to thank you all again for being with us. I love talking with you all. You are all brilliant, beautiful, fantastic women and mothers. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us. So
happy for doing this.
Yeah,
really
I was happy to. Yeah. And I hope everybody feels they have a great Seizure Action Plan Awareness Week where they feel like there's some progress made for you. So, all right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.